Yeah, it's looking fine, Vivek. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So I don't see the Zoom window here, so I'll just assume it's there. And so the topic today, unfortunately, I'm not talking about something on Birds of India. You've had a series of great talks there, but hopefully this would still be of interest. And what I'm talking about is my other passion outside of India and Indian birds. It's the birds of the Neotropics, or the New World Tropics. So I'll try to go through that. There are a lot of birds here. It's the bird continent. Over 1/3 of all species on Earth are found in South America. If you include Central America, it's even more. And so there's a lot to share. But let's see how much we can do in the limited amount of time. But I do want to mention that all the pictures here are either mine or my son's. So my son has become a great photographer, and this has become his passion as well. So all the pictures I share here are between him and me. So with that, let's do a quick, just what do we mean by the New World Tropics or the Neotropics? It's really from a perspective of how the world has been divided up into bird regions. The Neotropic includes everything from Mexico all through Central America and all of South America. In reality, the tropics would mean the areas between the Tropic of Cancer, which actually goes through Mexico, and Tropic of Capricorn, which goes somewhere around between Bolivia and Argentina, which is really where the bulk of the birds are. But for the purposes of the bird ecoregion division of the world, the Neotropics includes all of Central and South America. So we'll come back and talk about this a little bit more, but just with that much intro, I'd like to move on. I just going to show a few numbers because this really is a personal journey. And so that's why the title says A Delhibirder's Tale. So I want to talk about how I got from a schoolboy in India, in Delhi, looking at, reading books and watching TV shows about South America and finally ending up there. But I'll show a few numbers just to put things in context. And so this is a table that I pulled together from BirdLife International's database of the number of species per country and the top countries in terms of number of birds. So you can see it starts with Colombia, and the top three are Colombia, Peru, Brazil, more than 1,800 species. Then in Asia, you get Indonesia and China show up. India is eventually at number 9th. Now, BirdLife International uses a different taxonomy. I think usually in Indian references, we are talking more like 1,300 species. But just to keep things apples to apples, by the same metric, you have countries like Colombia, and these bolded are the South American and neotropical countries. Colombia, Peru, Brazil, Ecuador, Bolivia, Venezuela, all of them are more than India. And then Mexico is close. And much further down, smaller countries like Panama and Costa Rica are also 800 to 900 species. And if you look at the area comparison, it's pretty striking with Colombia, Peru are about 1/3 the size of India, and they have greater than 1.5 times or even more, or almost double in certain cases, the number of species. And if you do the math about diversity in terms of number of species per 1,000 square kilometers, you can see that these countries, and especially Ecuador, which is a very small country, probably it's smaller than some of our states. It's 5 to 6 species every 1,000 square kilometer, compared to India, which will end up at 0.37. And it's striking countries like Panama and Costa Rica, very small countries, 50,000. That's basically the size of Uttarakhand. Uttarakhand is about 50,000 square kilometers. And it has 858 species. So this gives you a sense of why people like to travel to these countries and why they are some of the hotspots for diversity. So my journey started in Delhi, and this is a magazine. My mother used to work at Matre College, and there's a library there, and she had access to the library, and she would regularly bring me magazines, including National Geographics. And this particular edition, this is from 1983, and I found it online later. This was about the rainforest. And even though it was about the rainforest of the world, including Madagascar and Borneo, bulk of it was about Central and South America. And so reading that, it stayed with me. And then in the back of the book, there is this on assignment section where they talk about the people who actually made the trip and made the article. And this particular picture of these two photographers, sheltering in the rain using this giant leaf. There was something about this small picture that just burnt into my brain and my consciousness. And it just became sort of my mission, sitting there as a small kid in a 2-bedroom house in Delhi, just dreaming about going to these places and being able to live these moments. And so ever since then, whenever I have had the chance to get to the Neotropics, I make sure that I'm able to take my proof of purchase photograph with one of these giant leaves, which are everywhere in the rainforest and cloud forest, and try to recreate that moment. But so going back here, though, so it was this, and then I don't know if some of you are old enough to remember when Indira Gandhi was assassinated, and I think it was 1985, and there were 15 days of mourning, and in those days we had one channel, Doordarshan, and that's all we had access to, and then all the programming stopped, and then eventually some educational programming restarted. So during that time, they played David Attenborough's Living Planet, which was such an instrumental series in my development and my interest in nature. And the jungles episode is from that Living Planet in Attenborough's is about Central and South America and the rainforest. And that was one of my favorite episodes. And then the other one was The Flight of the Condor, which was a BBC series. The third episode of The Flight of the Condor it's actually in Ecuador, but it goes from the top of the Andes straight down to the Amazon, is what that one episode is about. And it was something that those two shows were so instrumental in my upbringing. So the power of video, and they had an emotional impact. Nowadays, we have a lot better nature shows in terms of quality, but the emotional impact they had on me was amazing. So anyway, then I went to IIT Delhi. Here we started a nature club. I was part of a nature club when we went to Rajaji National Park. And this was the first bird I saw. This is a Indian golden oriole. In those days, we had only Russian binoculars with 20 people and one pair of binoculars. I finally got my turn. I looked in it. I saw the golden oriole. It opened its beak, gave a call, and I was hooked. So from that point onwards, I was spending a lot of time with the nature club gang. We went to Top Slip near Kerala, in the border of Kerala and Tamil Nadu. This was a WWF camp, as Bhanumati. We probably know some of these folks. So Karthik, and some of my classmates. I met my wife was also here, Gargi. Eventually we married. So this was a great trip for me. The first time I actually been to something that's similar to a rainforest. And this basically Curry and Shola, which is actually not a rainforest in the evergreen rainforest, but it's still a very moist, deciduous, and it has that characteristics. And just loved being there. And this was something that was the most memorable element, was to see great pied hornbills. And I've never seen anything like that up until that in my life. And then I realized that, well, India actually has a lot of the same kind of habitats and diversity that I used to read about. So definitely, that brought it all back to that there's a lot to be seen in India. But by then I was already on my way to grad school. So I was in New Jersey, in Princeton. I spent 5 years there. One of the values or benefits of being there is being an international school is you meet people from around the world. So I rediscovered birding there with this bird. It's a northern cardinal. It reminded me that there are birds here too. It wasn't just in India. So I opened my eyes and started looking around there. And then being in an international grad school, you meet a lot of people. And there were people from the biology department that we used to have dinner with. And they lived in my same dorm as me. And one of them gave me this book. This is The Birds of Colombia. This to me is still the best field guide ever written. And in terms of, obviously the terms of the kind of birds that are in there, like these mountain tanagers, which are just mouth-watering plates after plate. But the way it's been written, and in a very brief paragraphs, Steve Hilty is the author. He has this gift of being able to describe the bird's behavior, its habitat, and what you would expect to see in just a few lines. And so anyway, so I spend my time just poring over this book, dreaming about getting back to South America. And eventually I did make it. In 1995 was when I finally made it to the Amazon. This is in Peru, in Iquitos. Was just a life-changing trip. Everything you dreamed about, it's like your life's dreams being realized. I don't have any pictures from that time, so that's the downside. And this is Ashish's talk a few days ago, Ashish Pitti's talk about birding with a sketchbook. This is how I was birding there. I was on my own. I was there for a week. I had, and I had no idea what the birds were other than what I could decipher from this, birds of Colombia, even though I was in Peru. So I would see something, take notes, rely on the preparation that I had done. So I ended up with around 150 species. And it was great, but that area has close to 600 species. So I got only a fraction of those because we didn't have access to the resources that exist today. But anyway, the one, just to show you where this was, this is Iquitos. So these red spots are the places that I've been since. Iquitos is down here. It's on the Amazon. It's about 3,000 kilometers from the mouth of the Amazon. But even at this point, the river is 7 kilometers wide, 7 miles wide, in fact. Huge river. It looks like a little ocean, even up until this point. So, but it gives you a great sense of what the Amazon is like. Here, the only picture I did get was this species. This is a little tropical screech owl. So I can claim this to be my first bird photograph. It was a little point and shoot camera, and I scanned it later. So this little owl would come in and sit right on top of my bed. Our beds were basically, there were no walls. There was just a thatched roof. And it would come and sit right on top of my bed. And its call woke me up. I pulled out my little camera. I was able to get this picture. So this is the downside of those days is this, yes, you bird with a sketchbook, but all you can share with is your memories. You can't actually share photographs and share, bring them back with you. But anyway, back here, so that was a great trip. I was on a high for many weeks after that. But one big regret was I didn't get to see any of the large macaws. So this plate is the macaws of Peru. And the story with the macaws is, when I was growing up in Delhi, in Delhi Zoo, back near the back, way across the back, there was a bird section. And there they had 2 macaws. I still remember those. There was a hyacinth macaw, and there's one of the scarlet macaws. Well, first time I saw them as a little kid, I was just blown away. I was like, what are these things? I mean, is this even a bird? I mean, what is this? And then I'll remember reading the little descriptive plate below it, and it said found in South America. And that little plate is still burnt in my brain. I was like, these birds exist and they are found in the wild. I have to go see them. So wanting to see the macaws was one of my life's mission as well. And I went to Peru and I didn't see them. The only ones I saw were this chestnut-fronted and red-bellied, which in my mind were just overgrown parakeets. They looked a little bit like our Alexandrine parakeet. I wasn't super impressed with them. I really wanted to see these big ones. So I felt like I needed to go back. And so while I was still in grad school, well, by then actually I was starting to graduate, but I was reading these books, and this is the other one which was very instrumental for me. It was The Birds of the High Andes. This is another classic by Felza and Crabb. These are famous ornithologists who studied a lot in South America. So reading about the Andean condor and kind of wanting to go back there to relive the Flight of the Condor TV series. And then I was lucky enough to meet Thomas Walke. So Thomas is he's an ornithologist from Peru, and he's one of the most significant and important ornithologists active today in Peru. He's discovered a number of species. But back then he was a graduate student, so we were just graduate students in Princeton, used to hang out together. And he wrote this book much later. But at that time, once I told him that I had been to Iquitos, he said, well, you need to go to southern Peru, to this national park called Manu. And he drew it on a piece of paper for me. And I still have that little map as a memory, as a little memory, as a hand-drawn map of going from Cusco to the lowland rainforests of Manu National Park. So many years later, I was able to do that. I actually found, this was still off the beaten path. I mean, it was not too many birders were yet going there. The logistics were still a little bit hard there. And I found a birder called Scott Conop. And people here probably remember him from his cassette on the bird sounds of the Himalayas. So he had two cassettes, bird sounds of Nepal and bird sounds of Himalayas. Those were really the only audio recordings available. And so I had bought those because during this time, as Nick mentioned, by this time, we had, I started spending a lot of time in India. So I had started Delhibird, working, closely working with Nick and others. So I did get these two cassettes, and I heard about Scott Conop. So when I saw his name as a tour leader for a trip going to Manu National Park, I immediately signed up. So eventually we ended up there, and this was my first view of the Andes. And I was a little shocked to see how developed they were. Developed as in, the nature that I had dreamed about, it wasn't immediately visible. This is where bulk of the population lives. It's mostly deforested, or it has eucalyptus and other non-native species, but still it's the Andes. So I was, and here's the start of my flight of the condors journey. We start at the top of the Andes. You see the snow behind. These are some of the sources of rivers like the Amazon. That's where they are born. So you move down, and eventually you come over the crest of the Andes from the dry side to the wet side, which is on the eastern slope, and you come into the land of the cloud forests. So right here, right at 11,000 feet, covered in clouds, one of the wettest places on earth. You see these waterfalls, tall forests and waterfalls and rivers, kind of just amazing place. And Manu National Park probably at this point has over 1,000 species just in itself, just within the confines of one national park, because it goes from close to 14,000 feet all the way down to the lowland Amazonian rainforest. So when you go down a transect like this, you come from the top, we go down. This was somewhere in the subtropical region where this little lodge, as it was called, this is where we stayed, which is essentially just like a wooden shack. But the number of species and everything that was going on, just unbelievable. And finally, we come to this area just before you enter the lowlands from the Andes, and it's called a mirador, which in Spanish is a lookout. So we come to this point in this mirador, and this is the Manu River, and the rainforests are stretching out in front of you. And sitting here in the afternoon, there was a flight of the macaws. So one by one, different species of macaws came through. Yeah, the scarlet macaws came in, and there and then I felt like, okay, my mission in life is complete. I've seen the macaws. It was a moment when it was like, okay, now what do I do with the rest of my life? I've met my life's goal. But it was amazing just sitting there. We had multiple species of macaws. 3 species came in. And much later in the trip, we went to this place. It's called the Macaw Lick, or a clay lick. So the bank of the river gets eroded, and it exposes these mud banks. And macaws and other parrots come there to eat the clay because it acts like an anti-acid. Because they eat fruits from the forest, which can be very acidic. And then they come and eat the clays, which are anti-acidic. So there are a few clay licks that are known throughout the Amazon, and this was one of them. And years later, I went to another clay lick in the southern Peru, in the Tambopata area. We went there with family, and we saw 3 different species of macaws come down. It's hard to describe it in words. I wish I had time to show you the video. It's just an unbelievable feeling sitting there. You feel like this is nature as it was meant to be, unadulterated, untouched by humans. A spectacular moment of these giant birds coming down one by one. So first you get the red and green macaws come in, then the scarlet macaws come in, and eventually the third species, which is the blue and gold, come in, or blue and green. We were waiting for them to come down to the clay lick. They were hanging out there. So they come in series of series of species. So when their turn was coming, we joke with my daughter, because my daughter was there too, that she sneezed very loudly. And while these macaws were waiting to come down, the sneeze scared them and they took off. So we never got to see the blue and golds come down to the clay lick, but I got them in flight. So it was an amazing experience. And so that trip really was something. It was a 3-week trip going through, like we said, already talked about the Andes and coming down to the river, going through the river, seeing the Native Americans there, or the Native Indians. This is the Machiganga tribe. Seeing different habitats, learning about the fact that the Amazon is not one monolithic forest. There are different habitats in there, like oxbow lakes. So these are giant otters. So this is all point and shoot camera, by the way, and scanned. So the quality is bad, but this is more of my memories. Black water. So this is another phenomenon in the Amazon where some rivers are called whitewater rivers, like the Amazon itself, and certain rivers like the Rio Negro are blackwater rivers. So these are soils which don't drain very well, and the leaves fall in the water, and the tannins from the leaves make the rivers blue. So the Rio Negro, which is the largest tributary of the Amazon, is actually a blackwater river, and it's called Rio Negro because it's black. It's another fascinating part of being in the Amazon. Exposure to canopy towers, and this is still something that hasn't caught on in India yet, but in the Amazon, the canopy is yet another life system. It's an entirely different life zone. And if you have to see the species in the canopy, you have to get up there. So you have to go up to the towers on the canopy tower and go there in the morning, and you look across and see, hundreds of species, literally hundreds of species are possible sitting there on the top of a canopy tower. But there's also downsides, and also saw the negative side of what's happening in the Amazon, and in fact through the Andes as well. Slash and burn agriculture. These soils are really poor. So what people do is they cut the forest, then they burn them right there and then. The ash provides the fertilizer. So you get a couple of seasons of good crops, you move on. And you do cash crops like bananas or cocoa. Nowadays it's coffee. In a lot of places it's cocaine or coca leaf. So this is unfortunately is happening all over. And we can spend a whole talk talking about the conservation issues, but we try to stay focused on the positives here. So I won't spend too much time worrying about this, but it's heartbreaking to go to some of the same places and see what's happening over the years. But anyway, from happier moments, this was me back in 1999. This is Machu Picchu. I have to do the proof of purchase shot that you have to do once you're up there. So that was in 1999, and then 20 years later, I was back there in 2015 with my family, same place, same binocular, just had grown up, looking a little bit older, and at least had a better camera. So from this point onwards, I can actually show you some decent pictures because I had started bird photography around 2006 and so. But so during all of these intervening years, this is my tale of the Delhibirder's tale. These spots are basically the places I've been in the Neotropics. And frankly, I have just focused here. So between Central South America, the United States, and India, that's all I've birded. I haven't been to Africa, I've been to Australia. I feel like you have to really immerse yourself in one region to really understand it, because once you understand it, you appreciate it more. So that's the philosophy I've taken. So I've traveled all over, starting from these boundaries, the Mexico-USA border, because certain tropical species, they come into the United States, just barely across the border. So whether it's from San Diego to Texas, even Florida gets Caribbean birds. Caribbean is part of the Neotropic. So the Bahamas, Trinidad and Tobago, it's a fascinating place, Trinidad and Tobago. There's 40% of the population is of Indian origin. The food there is of Indian descent. Then Central America with Mexico. This is the Petén region. This is the land of the Mayas. There are rainforests here. Belize, a very small country, but most of it is still forested. Coming down to Central America here in Costa Rica and Panama, you have a sharp distinction between the Caribbean slope and the Atlantic or the Caribbean slope and the Pacific slope. There are mountains here. This little country here, 900 species. You can travel across it's 50 kilometers or less. Of course, you have the Panama Canal right here on the isthmus, which is I think around 50 kilometers. You go from the Caribbean to the Pacific. Being on the canal, that's an experience in itself. And the watershed of the Panama Canal is nothing but rainforest. Then you come down to the Andes, and the Andes, there are distinctions between the west slope of the Andes and the eastern slope. You have the forest along the coasts, And then you have the Amazon. And this is Manaus in Brazil. This is where the Rio Negro meets the Amazon. Further down, then, this region is Northeast Brazil. This is a different region. I'll talk about it briefly later. Different from the Amazon. But so this is the places I've been to. And lately, the biggest joy right now is to be able to bird with my son. This is my son, Vayun. He's become a great photographer himself. So every year he takes pictures like this, makes a calendar that he tries to sell for fundraising. So this is part of what we like to do together, and we spend a lot of time there. So now, again, not to get too technical, but in case you even can see this, these are all the families that are specialities of the Neotropics, which are basically birds only found in the New World, tropics, and nowhere else. So there are about 60 families which are predominantly neotropical. And certain groups like the hummingbirds, there are over 350 hummingbirds. The New World and African parrots, it really means the New World parrots, over 150 parrots. Antbirds, flycatchers, 400 species of flycatchers, and tanagers. So these are some of the typical species, along with things like toucans and such. So I want to now try to take you through that, do a quick flyby of the diversity of that. But I want to still keep it personal. So I want to do it in the form of various trips that we have made, our birding adventures, and try to talk about birds and then use them to talk about birds. So the first, and I'll start with our latest adventure, which was a trip to Ecuador in search of a new hummingbird. So before I talk about that story, what are hummingbirds? Hummingbirds are a new world family. These are tiny birds which feed on flowers. So this is a copper-rumped hummingbird, and it's feeding on heliconia flowers here. So they'll remind you of sunbirds, very similar in the sense that they're small, they're iridescent, very energetic, and they feed on nectar. So hummingbirds are beautiful, and like I said, there are over 350 species. Just amazing diversity there. And this is what makes them special. So this is a ruby topaz hummingbird from Trinidad. It looks pretty, right? It's not bad, but it turns its head, it catches the right light, and it glows. So hopefully this comes across. I'll play this again. You can just see how it just turns its head, and every feather in its plumage catches the light. And so it's not the pigments in the feathers. It's actually the structure of the feathers and how it diffracts light that brings out this iridescence. Here's another example. This is a hooded visor bearer. This is endemic in Brazil. Looks pretty. It turns its head and it catches fire. And look at this little necktie here, rainbow colored necktie. So as you can imagine, like when the first explorers came to Central and South America and they saw these species, they were just blown away. And they came up with such fanciful names, hooded visor bearer. So and there are lots of names like that. So what do you call a bird like this? It's a tiny bird. It's called a rufous crested coquette. So there are several hummingbirds they call coquettes because of, I guess, the ornaments that they have. And name of, I'll click through a few species. This is a long-tailed sylph. So you can see the colors in its tail. And this is a male with a short tail. And here's a full male with a full tail. Sorry, the long-tailed sylph is on the east side. This is actually the violet-tailed sylph. Look at the tail. Next to it is a pink-fronted brilliant. It's not a shabby bird, but compared to the violet-tailed sylph, it looks pretty pale in comparison. And so this is what the hummingbirds are all about. Empress brilliant. This is my son's photograph. This was a setup with multi-flash. So while I took some in natural light, he was also experimenting with this. So it catches every feather catches fire in pictures like this. Empress brilliant. And then you can see the names here, right? So they have 350 species, and people were, coming up with, and they were running out of names. So some of the names are religious names, or a religious symbol. So this is a white-necked Jacobin. For some reason, it reminded people of the Jacobins. For me and my son, we call it the monsoon bird, because when it starts raining, these come to feeders. So where your hummingbird feeders, they'll come. When it starts raining, all the other hummingbirds will vanish, but the Jacobins come out, spread their tails, and they just seem to be enjoying the rain, like this bird here. So this is an immature Jacobin. This is a male Jacobin, white-necked Jacobin. This is a hermit. So we have Jacobins and we have hermits. The hermits are another family of hummingbirds, and their bill is evolved to feed on heliconia flowers. And often the hermits are the first species you will see when you're walking around the rainforest. They'll come and they'll buzz you, especially if you're wearing like a bright colored shirt. They'll come and hover about your heads. So we'll keep going. So these early explorers, they named them after metals. They named them after jewels, like the ruby topaz before. There is a set of birds that are called coronets. So this is a chestnut-breasted coronet. Sorry for my ergonomic reminder. It comes in. A chestnut-breasted coronet. This is from the Andes. Velvet purple coronet. Buff-tailed coronet. So you probably get the theme here, right? So names of precious metals. Here's a blue-chinned sapphire. You can barely make out the blue chin. It's very hard to see, but it's distinct from a white-chinned sapphire. And this is Vayun's favorite photograph, one of his favorite photographs, because it actually shows the chin. And this is when he was still young when he took this in Trinidad. Sapphires. Then now you get into even more fanciful names. Wood star. This is a white-bellied wood star. So people whoever came up with this weren't being very objective, right? So they're names like wood stars. This is a wood nymph. This is a crowned wood nymph. So you have wood stars, wood nymphs, sunbeams. This is a shining sunbeam from the Andes. Then after that, you run out of fanciful names and you just start describing the bird. So this is a white-tailed saberwing. So these wings look like sabers. This is from Trinidad. This species is only found in Venezuela and Trinidad, and Venezuela is not safe to visit. There are a lot of problems there. So if you want to see this species, right now the only place to see it is in Trinidad. Brown violet ear. So it's brown and it has a violet ear. So just name it straight after the adornments of the bird. This is one of my favorite names. This is a purple-bibbed white tip. So this is the front. So it's a purple-bibbed white tip. Pretty straightforward. But when you have 350 species, what can you do? You run out of names. This is a booted racket tail. By the way, all of these are really beautiful birds, very small. And in the old days, it would have been impossible to take pictures like this. And the reason I have these is because they were all at feeders, or they were coming close to feeders. If you want to take them in the wild, I have a few species from the wild, but you have to find the right flowers and wait for them. If you're lucky, you'll get them. And this is one of them. So first the name, wire-crested thorntail. So this is from Ecuador. So this one doesn't come to feeders as often. So we had to be very patient, and we found a patch of flowers and they were coming in there. These are very tiny birds, very restless. So it's a challenge to get them. This is Vayun's photograph again. Beautiful. So I hope you get the sense that hummingbirds are special. So imagine then that if you read that in 2018 is when an entirely new species of hummingbird was discovered. Not a subspecies, not something that was like known but had not been described because of the differences in vocalizations or behavior, just an entirely new hummingbird. And this is what we wanted to see. So last year, in 2019, we went to Ecuador. I had my own targets, other species which had recently been rediscovered or had just come, or my old nemesis. But Vayun read about the new hummingbird, the blue-throated hill star, and he wanted to see this. And it's found on this tiny patch on a ridge in the Andes, nowhere else. So this is where we wanted to go. I found somebody who could take us there. He's a bird guide, Pablo Andrade. And so we teamed up with him and we went off for that. So just a little photo log of a journey. So this is a flight from Quito, and you start seeing these volcanoes. This is the volcano Cotopaxi, which was actually from that Living Planet and the Flight of the Condor episodes. This is Volcan Antisana. So in Ecuador, there's an avenue of the volcanoes like that. Then eventually you come to this area near Loja, when we started our road journey to go up to that ridge where the hill star was. And again, this is the place where Google Maps shows no roads, but roads exist now. Just in the last few years, there are these dirt roads. And because of them, this whole area is settled. So you can see native vegetation is gone. So that was pretty shocking to see, because if you read the old guidebooks, they will talk about southern Ecuador still being green, but that's changing rapidly. But anyway, so we found the road. The guide, Pablo, also had not been there before, or he had been there only once, and we got lost, and the weather was turning bad. It was a dirt road. We were afraid that we'll get stuck in the mud. And so this is really where we needed to go, up there. And so it was looking pretty dicey. And my son was with me. He was barely 14. And this was first real hardcore experience like that. So we were worried. It was if touch and go for a while. But eventually we made it to the top of the ridge. This is actually seen looking over to the Pacific side. And this vegetation is called the paramo. These are the high plains of the Andes. The low grassy shrubs, plants like this. This is the puya plant, related to the cactus. So we made it to the top there. This was a little cabin. It was extremely cold at night, but luckily we had a little fire to keep us warm. So woke up the next day excited to find our new hummingbird, but the weather was pretty bad. It was all misty, foggy, and we couldn't even find the patch, a native patch where the species was supposed to be. But eventually we found it. This was the landscape. And finally, the blue-throated hill star. This is Vayun's shot. I was right next to him, but I couldn't get a shot like his. But here it is, blue-throated hill star on these flowers. It only feeds on these flowers, the Churicava flowers. This is one of the highest altitude hummingbirds in the world, the hill stars. And its distinctive feature is the blue throat. And so he's a photographer, Vayun, is very happy. He's giving a thumbs up. The bird was on this flower here. But what's happening here is that little patch of forests, it's probably in one hilltop right now where the species is known. Everything else is a biological desert. The native plants are gone. There is eucalyptus growing. So about $300,000 is enough to buy about 600 acres, which is the entire species range. 600 acres is the entire range where this bird lives. And 300,000 can save it. So there's a campaign out there to try to raise the money to do that. And we are trying to help with our photographs and kind of raising awareness of it. So anyway, that was our journey there. And we finally made it back. Since this is a Delhibird talk, we have to talk about what happens after the birding is over. So what I like to do is go, get the local beers. This is the local beer from Saraguro. Local food, again, in keeping up with the Delhibird spirit. So this is the local corn. Corn comes from Central and South America, a lot of variety there. So these are the joys of birding. You come back after a hard trip, get your drink, get your thing, get your food. So my next story is what I call hope you find a new species. So this is about a barbet. So in South America, there are a few species of barbets. This is a red-headed barbet from Ecuador. This is the female of the barbet. And then there's another family called the toucan barbets, because these barbets are related to the toucans. So this is from the Pacific slope of Ecuador. So you can see that barbets are colorful and they're striking. And then in 1996, an entirely new species of barbet was found. It's called this one, the scarlet-breasted barbet. And its discoverer was Daniel Lane. Now, Daniel Lane was a birder in New Jersey when I was there, and we used to correspond over email. He helped me find a few local birds there. Then he told me that he had joined the Louisiana State University and was going on an expedition on this remote area of Peru. So I wrote him in an email, and I still have that email. I said, hey Dan, hope you find a new species. And did he find a new species? He found the scarlet-banded barbet, an entirely new barbet, spectacular looking, which shocked the world when it was found, the birding world, because nobody expected something this distinctive to have gone unnoticed. But where it was on a little area, this little ridge called the Cordillera Azul, which is down here. This range, this is where it was found. And the only way you could get there was you had to go up the Amazon from this town of Pucallpa. You have a 7-day boat journey. Then you switch over to this tributary, and then you eventually have to hike up to that ridge. And so I was planning to do that. I would have done it. I was researching how to do it. Some people were doing it. But eventually in 2012, another birder called Todd Mark, he came up with the idea that maybe it's on the other side of the ridge. So this is 50 miles of, but it might as well, these 50 miles may well as be, from Earth to the moon. These are remote rainforests, totally inaccessible. But on this side, a road was being built. New settlers were coming in. So Todd went up to that road and he found the barbet there. And once that happened, then it became a target for a lot of birders. So I joined up with a small team of birders and we went there. This is flying over from Lima. This is the highest mountain in Peru, Huascaran. Then you come down to the Huallaga River. A few years ago, this was not a safe place to go. This was the heartland for coca plantations or for growing cocaine. Now it's a lot better there. So this is the Huallaga River. And then this is our little road that we went on. And so the story here was things were looking good. We thought we'll get up there. This was only 30, 40 kilometers. We get up there, maybe by time for lunch. But it didn't work out that way. So by the way, just wanted to show this. This is Doug Williams. At that time, he was number 20th in the world in the number of species. And another birder on the trip was Philip Rostron, who at that time was number 3. Now he's number 2 in the world. He's at 9,600 species. Peter Kastner, that a lot of people here know. Peter is right now number 5 in the world. So anyway, so Phil, Doug, so there's some hardcore birders on the trip. So it started out looking good, but literally 10 minutes after the shot was taken, it ended up like this, mud. It was just 30 miles of sheer hell. We would drive for a few feet, then the car will get stuck. And we had brought people along with us, or that's just how it works there, who would jump out, try to dig the car out. And it was just going through these tracks, and you stay within the tracks, and every few meters you would get stuck. So that what was supposed to be a couple of hours ended up being 12 hours of a very frustrating time. We eventually got there. We were supposed to camp here, but this is that's how things are changing. A local person there had figured out that birders had started to come here. So he started renting his cabin as, this keeps happening. So he started renting his house to visiting birders. And it was nothing but just a simple wooden shack. But as far as we were concerned, it might as well have been the Ritz-Carlton instead of trying to camp in a muddy field. So next morning, woke up. This is what it looks like. This is the result of slash and burn. You can see patches of native forest along with deforested areas. And so even the habitat of species like the barbet is now is threatened. But eventually, hard work paid off, got to see the barbet. So I was so thrilled. Not only did I see it, I actually could get a picture of it. So I was really thrilled about it. And we had to hike for several miles in the sheer mud. So here I'm pretty happy. But right after I took this picture, I fell flat in the mud. So, well, you may just have to turn your head to see this one. So fell flat with my camera, my binoculars. Things got damaged in the mud, but it was all worth it. And finally, we came out a couple of days later, back from the wilderness and back to food. So another beer. I think you may be seeing a theme here. And I did want to say that one of the joys of traveling in Central and South America, especially as a vegetarian, is there's rice and bean everywhere. So, it's a variation of rajma chawal, but anywhere you go, there's a local variation of rice and beans, and there's some local hot sauce. So as long as those are there, people like me are happy. So moving on to another part of the story. So the lost antbird. So the story here was that there's a species called the white-masked antbird, which was discovered in 1937, and then it was lost to science. And then it had been refound, and we wanted to go find it. But before we go there, let me talk about what antbirds are. Antbirds are an important component of Central and South America avifauna. And they don't eat ants. So they're called antbirds, but they don't eat ants. Some of them follow ants. But they are Omnivorous birds, to me, they remind somewhat of babblers. It's a huge variety, and the names are tied to old world names, even though they have nothing to do with the birds of the old world. So this is an ant shrike. So fasciated ant shrike is with a scorpion from Panama. This is a giant ant shrike, handsome looking bird. This is the female of a barred ant shrike. Silver-cheeked ant shrike is endemic to Brazil. I guess you get the idea. This is a black-hooded ant shrike. So there are ant shrikes, there are ant wrens. This is a rusty back ant wren. Again, nothing to do with wrens, it's just a name. Cincora ant wren, this is another endangered endemic from Brazil. And then you have antbirds. So this is a white-browed antbird. This is a black-faced antbird. So antbirds are very shy. Most of them are shy and skulkers. So anytime you get a picture like this, it's a thrill. But there are places where you will have up to 50 species of antbirds in one lowland patch of forest. So they're extremely important component of South American avifauna. And then some of them actually do follow ants. They follow army ants. So this is one of them. This is a black spotted bear eye. So these are called obligate ant followers. So wherever you have army ants travel in huge columns and they create a lot of ruckus, and other animals and invertebrates, they get out of the way. So when their ants are hunting, these birds will follow them, and then they will catch anything that flies off. They will go catch it. So our target, the white-masked antbird, was or is an army ant follower. And this is a section of Western Amazon in Peru. So 1937, the species was discovered. Then it was lost to science. And then my old friends, Thomas Walke and Dan Lane, together, they actually found the bird. They found it in 2001 in this remote area on the Morona River. And then in 2013, somebody found it near the small town of San Lorenzo. So that became our goal, to get there. And the only way you could get there was to fly. You can see the roads are being built now, but there's still no roads to that point. So we came to this town of Yurimaguas by road, then we flew there. So this is again one of those journeys. You go from the Andes to the Amazon to the town of Yurimagua. This is the Huallaga River. We were staying on the banks of the river there. Came to the little airport to charter our flight. Now the good thing with a small plane like this is that you get to see things. So this will give you a quick sense of what the Amazonian habitat is like. So around near the town, it's farming. You can see slash and burn agriculture. But further in, then you finally come to unbroken forest. Miles after miles of just unbroken forest. And in fact, this one, if you look closely, this thing is actually just palm trees. So this is a palm swamp. A palm swamp is a very unique habitat in the Amazon. And this is one of the largest palm swamps I have ever seen. So a lot of places there are still relatively undiscovered. But then you come to the small town of San Lorenzo. When you get near the town, again, you can see that there's human development there, but that's what allows people like us to actually get there and see something. So this is a little airstrip. And then in search for the bird, the locals there, they offer these motor taxis. So they took us into the forest where there are patches of forest which are getting opened up. And this is where you try to find the antbird. So unfortunately, this is one time when I couldn't get the photograph. So all I can show you is the plate. But the trip as a whole was not a complete loss, because I finally got to catch up with this nemesis of mine. This is a black-necked rect cotinga. So what are cotingas? So cotingas are an important element of South American birds. These are large birds, fruit-eating, and they're some of the most iconic birds in South and Central and South America. So this is a black-necked rect cotinga. Field guys will call it things like spectacular or striking. And one of the most important ones is this one, the cock of the rock. So this is the national bird of Peru. It's a large bird. These cotingas gather in leks where all the males come together. They display for the females, and then the females will come and choose one of the males. So this is from the east slope. It's a little orangish. And on the west slope, this is Vayun's photograph from Ecuador, blood red. So cotingas. Another important or interesting cotinga is the umbrella bird. This is a very large cotinga. There are 3 of them in the world. And it was my goal to see all of them. So this is the umbrella bird, the Amazonian umbrella bird. This is from Central America. This is the bare-throated umbrella bird. And finally, this was my nemesis, the long wattled umbrella bird. So you see this long wattle here, and it has a display where it uses this to make a sound. So it inflates it like this, and then it gives this loud booming sound. Fascinating things. They remind you of the birds of paradise in terms of the elaborate displays that they have. This is a screaming piha, and this is the cotinga. It's the looks that matter. It's its call. It's one of the loudest calls in nature. In fact, at one time it was considered the loudest, and impossible to see most of the times. So I was very happy to get this photograph. You can see its forked tail here. Forked tongue. You will hear the sound of the screaming piha in any jungle show, any jungle movie. They always have this call. It's like tweet, tweet-ya. It's a very loud call. These things are only found in South America. But there you have movies like The Predator or Sniper, and movies like that, which were not shot in South America, or even Apocalypse Now, supposed to be Vietnam, but you'll hear them in the screaming pihas in the background, but they're only found in Central South America. This is a bearded bellbird. This is another cotinga with a very loud call. So cotingas are important. And so our trip there, we didn't see the antbird, but we at least saw these. So it was worth it. So sometimes what you seek is not what you find, but you see other things along the way. So now, just very briefly, so we're going to run out of time here, so I'm going to speed it up. Part of what fascinates us is that birds are, they're distributed all over, and people are trying to understand why that happens. So this is a map that represents this. This is what, long time ago, I saw this map about these toucanets and how they are distributed. And I've annotated them with the rivers. So these rivers are acting like boundaries between the ranges of this multiple species of these toucanets. And I'll talk about these toucanets in a minute, but let me talk about toucans. Classic South American bird. This is the keel-billed toucan. This is also in Central America. Toucans remind of our hornbills. So remember the shot of the great pied hornbill that I shown before? These things are related, but they're not closely related, but they're related. They have convergent evolution. Similar to hornbills, they eat fruits. They have these long bills. This is a yellow-throated toucan. So they're the large toucans, and this is a plate-billed mountain toucan. So up in the Andes, there are these toucans, wild colors. Imagine colors like this. You give a kid a box of crayons and ask them to draw a bird. This is probably what they will draw. Then there are smaller toucans called arasaris. This is an ivory-billed arasari. This is a lettered arasari. You can see the markings on the bills. And then there are small green toucanets, this crimson rump toucanet. And finally, you come to these Salinidera toucanets. So I was showing you before that range map. There are 5 to 6 species, and you can see different parts of South America have different versions of the Salinidera toucanet. So to me, when I'm somewhere, I actually think in terms of which Salinidera toucanet am I in the range of. In my mind, that's how the map works. But finally, was able to see a few of them. And sorry for this again. This is an ergonomic reminder of taking a break. So this is a yellow-eared toucanet from Central America. This is a spot-billed toucanet. So you can see they look very similar, but they're different. So my goal is to see all of them, and there's one that's missing, and that's found in Venezuela. So the final quick journey we'll do here is from Brazil, and this is in Northeast Brazil, which is really a center of bird endemism. This is a trip I made with Ciro Albano, who's a bird guide there, who's put this region on the map. We did a road trip from the town of Fortaleza to Salvador. This was hundreds of miles of driving. But the reason you have to drive so much is because different birds have different pinpoint habitats. And this was one of my main targets, was this area of dry scrubland called the Caatinga, because here there is this blue macaw, the Lear's macaw, a highly endangered bird. At that time, it was only down to 200. Now, since then, it's rebounded. Blue macaws. So this was one of my targets was to see one of the blue macaws. There are only two left in the world, this and the hyacinth macaw. So got it in flight. Beautiful bird. It's emblematic of that area. There are grasslands there. This is the Cerrado grasslands. There's the Atlantic rainforest, which is different from the Amazonian rainforest. It's on the Atlantic coast. Only 10% of that original forest is left. But there are species here, like this is a hook-bill hermit. With Ciro's help, Ciro and I were actually the first two people to photograph this species at the time when we took this. Another bird, which was Ciro, me, and Ashok Khosla, who was with me that day. First people to photograph this bird, which is a Margarita's hermit. This is a Bahia tapaculo. If you look at some of the field guides, it say that this species is extinct, but it has been refound, and Ciro refound it, and we managed to get a picture of it. Tapaculos are extremely hard to photograph. And then there's a transitional zone between the rainforest and the grasslands. And in the 1980s, Brazilian ornithologists discovered this area, and they found multiple species, unique habitat here. This is one of the birds there, the slender antbird. Anyway, this was our target, was an Araripe manakin. So manakins are small little birds related to cotingas. They have elaborate displays, and we are out of time to show you this. I was going to show you a video of how this bird displays in a tiny lek, and you can see the video online though. It reminds us of tiny birds of paradise. So here's a golden headed manakin, white bearded manakin, white collared manakin, blue manakin. This is a golden winged manakin, band-tailed manakin. So you can probably get the idea. The manakins are pretty. So imagine if you find a new species of manakin. This was found. That was the Araripe manakin in 1996. It took all the way till 1996 to discover this bird, this Araripe manakin. And it's only found on this pinprick of a habitat, which are these sky islands of, they're wet forests in between this huge dry area. So we went there to see this is the Araripe manakin, and see how closely related it is to this species, the horned manakin or the helmeted manakin, which is in a totally different habitat, totally different region, very similar to each other. But the Araripe is in a tiny pinprick of a habitat, and the helmeted is white more. So, lots of things to see. This is a selection of all the bird families which are unique to Central and South America. We touched on a few of them, but there are a lot more. We barely scratched the surface. Here's a group of them called the Tanagers. Jewels, they look like jewels, right? You look at the color plates and you drool over them, and then finally you get to see them. So here are a few of them. This is all, by the way, all one genus, a Tangara genus, which at one time had 49 species in one genus, and all of them look colorful and spectacular like this. These are other tanagers. These are the allies of the tanagers. They're honey creepers. They're mountain tanagers. Just look at the colors here. And then you get to something which is very typical of South America. They're called the Ovenbirds. And they call Ovenbirds because some of the birds build these mud nests which look like ovens. But other ones they're related, but they don't make ovens, but they're still called Ovenbirds. And then they have fanciful names. There's a recurve bill. There's a leaf tosser. There is a thornbird. So you can see this little tiny rufous-fronted thornbird. It's building this huge nest of using these little sticks. And then you have another family called the wood creepers. They are different from our tree creepers. So these are sub-Ocene passerines, they're not true songbirds, but they are part of the passerines. Scythebills and other, very hard to photograph. And you can see how interesting it is. You go from these colorful tanagers to suddenly you get to these brown birds. But these brown birds are some of the most interesting birds in South America. And then it's a total travesty that I'm talking about Neotropics, but I didn't talk about flycatchers. Because flycatchers are the largest family, over 400 species in the family. They're in every corner of the Neotropics, and they've evolved into every ecological niche. And so here's a selection of those. Parrots, New World parrots. We talked about the macaws, but there's a whole bunch of different parrots out there, different shapes and sizes. Some are highly endangered, like this one, gray-breasted parakeet. This is one of the first photographs of it. This is another endangered one. Bahama parrot. After the hurricane in the Bahamas, who knows what the fate of this is? And then there are relatives of the birds, which are families which also exist in India or in Asia, but you can see the counterparts here. This is a southern lapwing. This is a purple gallinule. It looks like a swamp hen. This is a jacana. This is Vayun's favorite photograph of jacana looking at a little lily. It's a lily trotter looking at a lily. American flamingos, swallow-tailed kite. And then this is perhaps one of the most famous birds. This is a resplendent quetzal. It's a trogon. It's a trogon like our togan, but look at the long tail. This bird is of religious significance to the Mayans, to the Aztecs. It's the state bird, the national bird of Guatemala. It's a dream of many birders to go see this. So I was very lucky to not only see it, but actually get a photograph with its tail out there. And then nightjars. We have nightjars in India too, but here in South America, there are these ones with a huge tail. This is a scissor-tailed nightjar. And finally, the harpy eagle. This is the largest raptor, or the largest, other than the condor, it's the largest eagle in the world. It's even bigger than the Philippine eagle. Huge eagle, and it feeds on mammals, on monkeys, and it leads large swaths of undisturbed rainforest. So I spent many, many years over the last 20 years hoping to see one, but finally caught one in 2015. And this was actually a young bird. So, but it's still full size. And so I still haven't seen an adult. So there's still a lot to be seen. And, I hope to go back and catch a harpy. Maybe some of you will join me. I've been talking about putting a trip together from fellow-minded Delhibirders. We can go look for things because there's a lot to see. Today, we barely scratched the surface. But hopefully, this gives you at least a good idea. And hopefully, I didn't bore you too much. So I'll stop here right now, and if maybe we can take some questions and I can talk about some other birds during the questions. Nick, I'll stop now.
Thank you, Vivek. Thank you, Vivek. That was really enchanting talk. Lovely to see such beautiful photographs. We've opened up the chat box. In case anyone has questions, you can type them there and Vivek will try answering them.
So should I open the chat box?
I've opened it, Vivek. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we already have our first few questions up. So Maitra is asking, which is the rarest South American bird you have ever seen?
Yeah, it's a good question. I showed you some of them because some of these things have been very recently found. And in fact, a lot of my travels are now focused not on seeing the most number of species, because I've seen a lot and it's hard for me to go somewhere where I'll see, there are still regions of South America where I haven't been to, where I may see maybe 100 species if I spend a 2-week trip. But that's going to be very, very hard now. So my focus now is just to go where some of the target species are. So the Bahia tapaculo that I just showed you, one of the first people to photograph it, that's really relatively unknown, and it's not clear how many of them there are. But I would think that probably the blue-throated hill star, I was going to say Araripe manakin, because at the time when we visited it, its entire range was 26 square kilometers. That's it. But the blue-throated hill star that we went to, that I showed you earlier, right now it's believed to be 600 acres. It's probably around in some of the other hilltops near the one where we went to. We went to Cerro Arcos. There may be a few other hilltops where it exists, but from what's known today, 600 acres, that's it. So I would say that's probably the rarest one, but I've seen a lot of them because that's my travel goals is focused on finding or targeting the rare ones.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Next question is from Rajesh Dubey, who's asking, what is the right time to visit these areas?
So that's the good thing of being in a tropical area, is that there's always birds around. There's no, in the Amazon, there is no marked winter or summer. However, what does happen is that they have distinct wet seasons. So even though it rains pretty much every day, certain times of the year, it rains more than the other. So they're called the wet seasons. So it changes the way you travel. In the wet seasons, a lot of the forests are flooded, and that's actually a key element of the Amazon is the distinction between flooded forests and dry forests. So you have to be aware of that, and that may change what you see. But frankly, any time of the year you go, you can bird. And in the Andes, it's close to the equator, so it doesn't get as cold as it would, let's say, in temperate regions. And so almost any time of the year, it's good birding. But it varies from place to place, so you have to do the research. And you typically want to go when it's not the peak of the wet season. So that's the only time you want to avoid. And the wet season varies from place to place.
Okay. Another question from JVT Murthy. He's asking, what is the function of the long tail in the scissor-tailed nightjar?
It's a good question. There's a theory that says long tails help birds manipulate in air. So like the hummingbird I showed, the long-tailed sylph, for example, it's extremely acrobatic. And it's trying to, because hummingbirds do catch insects like our sunbirds, but they catch them in flight even. So the long tail might help in manipulating in the air. And it's possible that the scissor-tail nightjar or the lyre-tail nightjar may have a similar thing because they feed on the wing, right? They eat insects at night and they fly around. So it's possible that the tail helps them. But it's also possible that it may have no immediate ecological purpose other than it's a kind of sexual evolution. Like you get into the, like the birds of paradise or the cotingas, where the males have evolved to have these elaborate ornaments because it's like it's called runaway sexual dimorphism, because the males are competing with other males and they're doing it based upon some of these ornaments, and then the ornaments take a life of their own. So it's entirely possible that it's nothing more than just an evolutionary thing as similar to the birds of paradise. So I don't know whether it really has a purpose or it actually helps it in flight. But it's a spectacular bird if you see it. Waiting on the edge of a cliff at night, at the beginning of dusk is when these things come out. So you have to stand there as the evening falls, the bird sounds go down, and eventually when it gets dark enough, just before it becomes too dark, you'll see the silhouettes of these nightjars in the air. So if you see them in flight, all you see are silhouettes. That's why you will hardly ever see a flight shot of them. Or you get lucky and they are roosting, like the one that I showed you the picture. It was roosting right behind our lodge, and the local people, they knew where one of them was. So then you see them when they're nesting or they're roosting.
Okay. Renu is asking, which is your next bird in your 2C list? Which is your next target?
There's so many of them. It's hard to pinpoint. I will say it now, right? I've stopped birding on my own or traveling alone. I do it with my son. So I know what my son's next target is. It's a hummingbird called the streamer tail. And so there are two species of streamer tails in Jamaica. So Jamaica also has rainforests, and it's a hummingbird with a very long tail. It's endemic to Jamaica. There are two species. So at this point, I would probably say our goal would be to go to Jamaica to see the streamer tail. Now, these islands in the Caribbean, they don't have as many birds in terms of species, but they have a lot of endemics. And places like Cuba, Bahamas, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, they have their own endemics. And some of them, each island has its own version of birds of the same family or the same genus, but each island has its own species. But then there are some which have entirely species which are found nowhere else, like the streamer tail in Jamaica. So I'll say that's my next target.
Okay. Question from Shashank over here. He's asking, what is your neotropic life list?
I haven't actually tallied it together. That's my summer project or my retirement project would be to do that. I suspect it's, I've done my Ecuador and Peru list. I collated those, and just between Ecuador and Peru, it's over 1,000. And so between Brazil, Southeast Brazil, and Central America, I suspect that it's close to 2,000. But I really ought to tally it to get the actual count.
Wow. Okay, we're getting a lot of questions here regarding how to plan a trip. People want to know what's the ideal duration, how much does it cost, and if there are any particular places they should visit first to maximize the number of birds seen. So if you could give us some information around that.
Yeah, things are so much easier now with the internet and with the development of bird-focused tourism. I mean, ecotourism in general, but especially bird-focused tourism in all of these countries now. There's so much information on the web. I'm happy to, if people have specific questions, they can just reach me over email. I'd love to talk about this, and I can help people plan. I know a lot of the people in the industry, who have lodges, who are bird guides, and people who have visited with myself, so I can recommend them. So I can do it over email, but you have to just think about a few things. Budget does matter. So if you go as a group, it will reduce the cost. If you go by yourself, it can, and especially if you hire a guide, because you really do need guides. What we didn't talk about is, we focused on the positives, but there are risks too. And one of the biggest problem is safety, as in a lot of regions are out of reach right now. So you have to know where to go. And a large chunk, everything I showed is safe now, but there are parts of Mexico, Venezuela, parts of Colombia still where you don't want to go. So you need to know who you're going with, and a lot of established birders and bird guides, so you can go with them. Then a general idea of what are you going for? Are you going for maximum number of species, or you're going for targets, like I was describing before? Something that really fascinates you, like a macaws, or seeing the macaws on a clay lake, and rather go see for that, or want to see the harpy eagle. And harpy eagles, there are known nest sites, and they use the same nest site year over year. So maybe you do the research to say where's an active nest where people are seeing them, and you can go with the harpy in the mind. Or you want to see the Amazon. I mean, just seeing the river itself, it's a trip in itself. Where the Rio Negro meets the Amazon is called the meeting of the waters in Manaus. The black water of the Negro meeting the white water of the Amazon, and the two waters flow together for miles. You can see the two rivers flowing next to each other. So you can go see that, and when you are there, you'll see a lot of birds. But if you want to maximize the number of species in, let's say, a two-week time or 2 to 3 week time, the best thing to do is you have to combine the Andes with the Amazon. So it's a transect. So you start on the top and go down to the river, or go back the other way. There are a few roads, like Manu National Park. There are a few roads that cut across the Andes, and any of them is great for that. So in Peru, it's places like Manu, Cusco to Manu. In Ecuador, which is a standard thing now, there's a whole series of bird lodges that go from the Andes to the Amazon. So you can do those. Or you can go to Costa Rica. Costa Rica, in a very small size, you can go from the Caribbean to the Pacific and through the mountains. And in a relatively short amount of time, you can see, maybe 300 species you can see in a week, especially with the right guide or with the right preparation. So like somebody told me the first time I went to Iquitos, right? Partly I went there because I found a university group that was going there, so it was subsidized. And for $1,200, which was a lot of money for me as a graduate student, for $1,200, including lodging as well as airfare, that's impossible nowadays. But I went there for that reason. But somebody told me, they said, look, if you're only going to make one trip to South America, you go to a place like Iquitos or Manu National Park, and you can't go wrong. If you're ever going to make only one trip, any of these places is fine. And if you're going to go multiple times, you will probably want to go there anyway. So net, you can't go wrong. You choose something, go there, enjoy it, you won't go wrong.
Okay, great. We'll take maybe the last couple of questions. Janki is asking that, do you see any similarities in the bird diversity between the rainforests of Northeast India and the Amazon?
Definitely. So that's what, when I'm there, I keep thinking, as somebody who comes from India or who's birded in India, you keep making that mental map. And there was one time in 2003, I was in Namdhapa. So I'd gone there with Mohit Agarwal and Sujan Chatterjee. And we had done a multi-day hike in Namdhapa. And then we had gone down to, from the foothills of Namdhapa, we had gone down to Kaziranga in Assam. So we're seeing that diversity of habitats. And right after that, I was in Ecuador and was very close to each other in time. So I kept mentally doing the mapping. And while there isn't a one-to-one mapping between bird groups, like the babblers, you have such a huge variety of babblers in different ecological niches, similar to what you have in the Antbirds or the Ovenbirds. So I see that similarity. We talked about the sunbirds versus the hummingbirds. In Arunachal and in the Northeast, there are several species of sunbirds. Then you have the tanagers, but then you have warblers in India or in the Northeast. So the toucans and the hornbills, they are ecological counterparts, woodpeckers. So a place like Namdapa, or if you truly were to do a true transect in Namdapa from the top of Dapa Boom, which is 14,000, to the lowlands, in my mind, is very similar to doing a trek of a transect of the Andes. And while you may not see 1,000 species, you probably can still, on paper, you probably have upwards of 600, 700 species are possible. Jim Corbett National Park, my favorite example. On paper, the species list for Jim Corbett is close to 500, which is a mind-boggling number. And I think that includes, if you include the upper regions of Corbett, which are almost the same as the foothills of the Himalayas, they're almost at the same elevation, close to Nainital, maybe not all the way, down to the barrage at Ramganga River. If there are 500 species possible there, that's as a similar kind of diversity to some of the sites in Central America. And with a similar thing about the elevation and diversity of habitat leads to different species.
Great. I think those are all the questions we had till now. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Vivek. That was so fascinating as always. And we're missing you back home. So come back home fast.
Yeah, I wish I was, like I said, I was hoping to be in Delhi with you guys right now, but here we are.
Thanks for joining in, and you should go back to sleep now. It's early morning for you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Thanks.